We all know the feeling when something bothers us, but we choose to keep it to ourselves. It could be a situation, a person, or even an experience that has left a mark on our hearts. Yet, rather than confronting the emotion, we push it down, telling ourselves that it's not a big deal, that we're stronger than this, that it will pass. But in reality, this act of suppression doesn't eliminate the emotion. It simply buries it deeper inside. Hidden emotions have a subtle yet powerful way of shaping our inner world. What we refuse to acknowledge doesn't just disappear. It builds up silently, gradually, until it becomes a force of its own. Think of it like a pressure cooker. If you keep sealing it tightly without releasing the pressure, eventually the lid will blow off in a way you didn't expect. Hidden emotions are no different. At first, they might feel manageable, even inconsequential. But as time goes on, the unresolved feelings begin to eat away at our peace, often without us realizing it. They influence our thoughts, our decisions, and our relationships. When we pretend that we don't care about something that genuinely matters to us, it's as if we're denying a part of ourselves. We convince ourselves that this pretense is a form of strength. I don't need to care about that, we tell ourselves. But deep within, there's a quiet, almost invisible ache that refuses to go away. Emotions, especially the ones we don't express, are like seeds that begin to grow roots in the hidden corners of our hearts. If left unchecked, these seeds can eventually sprout into bitterness, anger, resentment, and anxiety. The challenge of hidden emotions is that they don't respect our attempts to ignore them. They will surface at the most unexpected times, in the most unexpected ways. Have you ever found yourself crying over something small, something that doesn't seem to make sense? That is the moment when the hidden emotions break free, revealing the depth of what we've been avoiding. What appears to be an outburst of emotion might actually be a buildup of all the things we've been unwilling to feel, speak, or confront. What makes this even more dangerous is the illusion of control. We deceive ourselves into thinking that by not addressing our emotions, we are maintaining control over them. But in truth, we are simply avoiding the inevitable. We may feel as if we are protecting ourselves, shielding our hearts from further pain, but in reality, we are creating an environment where that same pain festers and grows in ways we cannot control. What we avoid today can become the very thing that drives us insane tomorrow. This avoidance often manifests in many ways, through distractions, through busyness, through keeping ourselves occupied so we don't have to feel. We become experts at burying our emotions under layers of don't care or I'm fine. But inside, beneath that calm exterior, the storm is brewing. This emotional suppression doesn't only affect our mental state, it has physical implications as well. Stress, tension, and anxiety begin to manifest in our bodies, causing fatigue, illness, and even chronic pain. The body keeps score, as they say, of everything we fail to process emotionally. In the end, hidden emotions are not our allies, they are our silent enemies. They deceive us into thinking that we have control, when in fact we are allowing ourselves to be slowly consumed by them. The power of hidden emotions lies not in their ability to stay buried, but in their ability to drive us toward breakdown, until we are forced to face them, whether we are ready or not. Silence is often seen as a peaceful refuge, a moment of calm in the midst of chaos. It is in these quiet moments that we believe we can gather our thoughts, reflect, or simply rest. But silence, while appearing to be soothing on the surface, can be one of the most deceptive forces in our emotional lives. In truth, silence can conceal a world of unresolved emotions, hidden frustrations, and unspoken pain. When we choose to remain silent, it often feels like the safer choice. We believe that if we don't speak about something, if we don't confront a situation or a person, the problem will somehow disappear. In relationships, for example, when there's a disagreement or misunderstanding, it is easier to hold back our feelings rather than risk further conflict. I'll just let it go, we tell ourselves, but what we fail to realize is that silence does not erase the problem. It simply buries it deeper within us, where it begins to silently consume our peace. One of the most dangerous aspects of silence is its ability to create an illusion of resolution. We convince ourselves that by not speaking, by choosing to remain quiet, we have dealt with the situation, but what's left unsaid doesn't simply vanish. It sits there like an uninvited guest in our hearts, festering and growing. The silence may mask the issue for a time, but it does nothing to resolve it. In fact, it can distort our perception of reality. We begin to believe that silence is the solution, when in fact it is only delaying the inevitable. This silence, when left unchecked, often grows louder over time. Initially, it may feel like a form of control. I'm not going to let this get to me, we might think, but the more we suppress our feelings, the more we reinforce the belief that we are powerless to speak up or express ourselves. The longer we stay silent, the more we risk losing our ability to communicate honestly. What began as a quiet act of restraint can turn into an internalized pattern of repression. Eventually, we find ourselves emotionally distant, not just from others, but from ourselves. The problem with silence is that it leads to emotional isolation. We isolate ourselves from others when we refuse to share our thoughts, feelings, or concerns. Instead of seeking connection and understanding, we retreat into ourselves, afraid that speaking out might cause conflict or pain. But in truth, silence does not protect us, it isolates us further. Over time, we begin to feel like we are living in a cage of our own making, unable to break free because the very tool we used to protect ourselves, silence, has now become the prison. There is also a danger in the kind of silence that hides anger or resentment. We may hold our tongues, pretending that everything is okay, but beneath the surface we are seething. This silent anger can build up until it erupts in an outburst, not necessarily related to the original issue, but fueled by everything we have failed to express. That sudden explosion of emotion is not a sign of strength or control. It is a sign of emotional overload. The silence we once thought was keeping us safe has now become the very thing that is driving us to the edge. Moreover, silence has a way of eroding trust. In relationships, when communication breaks down and silence takes over, the gap between two people begins to widen. Silence speaks volumes, but not in the way we think. It communicates distance, avoidance, and sometimes even disdain. What is left unsaid often becomes the loudest message of all. Those who remain silent may believe they are protecting their hearts, but in reality they are pushing others away, creating an invisible wall that is harder to break down with each passing day. And yet, despite all of its dangers, silence is often our default response. It is easy, it is familiar, and it feels like control, but in truth, silence can be the most deceptive of all. It tricks us into thinking we are managing our emotions when, in fact, we are allowing them to silently destroy us from within. Silence might give the illusion of peace, but it is often just a veil covering the turmoil beneath. We often associate strength with invulnerability, this belief that being strong means never showing weakness, never admitting that we need help or that we are struggling. Society teaches us that strength is about standing tall, being self-sufficient, and handling everything that comes our way with unwavering resolve. Vulnerability, on the other hand, is seen as the opposite. Its weakness, a lack of control, something to be hidden or avoided at all costs. This dichotomy between strength and vulnerability creates an inner battle that many of us face on a daily basis. The struggle begins when we are confronted with difficult emotions, situations, or relationships that require us to open up, to let down our guard, to be vulnerable. In those moments, the question arises, if I show my true feelings, will I still be strong? Will I still be respected? Vulnerability, by its very nature, challenges the image of invulnerability we've worked so hard to maintain. We fear that if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, whether by expressing pain, sorrow, or uncertainty, it will make us appear weak, dependent, or less capable. So we fight against this impulse to expose our true selves, convincing ourselves that we must remain strong at all costs. But what is often overlooked is that real strength is not about suppressing emotions or avoiding vulnerability. True strength is found in the courage to face our emotions head on. Vulnerability doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. To allow ourselves to be vulnerable is to acknowledge that we are not perfect, that we are not invincible. This is where the internal battle intensifies, because the voice inside tells us that by being open and raw, we expose ourselves to judgment, rejection, and pain. And so, we choose silence, we choose to mask our emotions, and we choose to carry the weight of everything alone. What many fail to realize is that this constant suppression of vulnerability doesn't protect us, it isolates us. The more we strive to appear unshakable, the more disconnected we become from our true selves and from others. In an effort to uphold an image of strength, we begin to build walls around our hearts, convinced that if we let people in, if we share our struggles, they will see us as weak, incapable, or unworthy. But the truth is, the walls we build in the name of strength only keep us trapped in a prison of our own making. This internal battle between strength and vulnerability is not just a mental struggle, it also takes a physical toll. The stress of constantly fighting against our own emotions, of pretending to be fine when we are not, can lead to burnout, anxiety, and depression. It's as if the weight of the facade we put on every day is gradually wearing us down, stealing our energy and draining our joy. By choosing strength over vulnerability, we may appear to be holding it together on the outside, but on the inside we are slowly unraveling. There is a deeper wisdom in embracing vulnerability. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we give others permission to do the same. We create a space for authenticity, where true connection can thrive. It is in our vulnerability that we find compassion, understanding, and healing. Vulnerability fosters empathy. It helps us realize that we are not alone in our struggles. We are all human, and we all have moments of weakness. Strength, then, is not about denying those moments, but embracing them as part of our journey. It is the strength to admit that we don't have all the answers, the strength to ask for help, and the strength to show up as we truly are, even when we feel fragile. The inner struggle between strength and vulnerability is not one that can be easily resolved, but it is one that we must navigate daily. It requires courage to step into the unknown, to relinquish the illusion of control, and to trust that we can survive, even thrive, by embracing our vulnerabilities. Strength is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the willingness to be vulnerable in a world that constantly pressures us to be perfect, invulnerable, and unbreakable. It is the understanding that we are strongest when we allow ourselves to be most real, most human, most open to both the pain and the beauty that life offers. Emotional suppression is one of the most insidious forces in our lives. On the surface, it might appear like a form of control, a way to protect ourselves from pain, from discomfort, or from vulnerability. We suppress emotions because we think it's easier to keep them hidden, to bury them deep inside, where they won't disturb the calm and order we've worked so hard to create. We tell ourselves that it's a sign of maturity to not let our emotions dictate our actions or behavior. But beneath the surface, emotional suppression is not a protective shield. It is a silent trap that, over time, will quietly take its toll. The most dangerous aspect of emotional suppression is that it doesn't seem harmful at first. At the moment of suppressing our feelings, we might feel a temporary sense of relief. We avoid confrontation, we avoid feeling vulnerable, and we avoid what we fear may be overwhelming emotions. It feels like a coping mechanism, a way of keeping the peace and not letting emotions control our lives. But this relief is only temporary, and it comes at a great cost. Emotions, by nature, are meant to be felt and processed. They are messages from within that guide us toward understanding, healing, and growth. When we choose to ignore them or stuff them down, we are essentially rejecting a part of ourselves that needs attention. What makes emotional suppression so dangerous is that it doesn't disappear just because we choose to ignore it. Emotions do not simply fade away when we push them aside. Instead, they build up layer after layer, each one a piece of unprocessed pain, frustration, sadness, or anger that waits for an opportunity to surface. This accumulation of unresolved emotions creates a kind of internal pressure. The longer we suppress, the more intense this pressure becomes. What was once a small discomfort turns into a deep well of unresolved emotion that eventually demands release. This release, however, doesn't come gently. When emotions are finally allowed to surface, they do so in a rush, often in ways we don't expect or understand. At times, this release might take the form of an emotional outburst, where a minor incident triggers a flood of anger or tears. It could be a breakdown over something seemingly insignificant, but the emotional eruption is actually the result of years of suppressed feelings finally bubbling to the surface. It's as though the dam we've built to keep our emotions in check has cracked, and everything that has been buried beneath it rushes out uncontrollably. What we thought we were protecting ourselves from has now become the very thing that overwhelms us. Beyond emotional outbursts, the effects of suppression are also seen in our relationships. When we choose not to express our feelings, we unintentionally create distance between ourselves and others. People can sense when we are holding back, when we are not being fully authentic. In relationships, whether with family, friends, or partners, true connection is built on honesty and openness. Emotional suppression undermines this connection because it builds a barrier between us and the people who care about us. We become closed off, detached, and emotionally distant, even when we yearn for closeness. Moreover, the impact of emotional suppression is not just psychological. It can also manifest physically. The emotional burden of constantly holding everything in can lead to physical stress, tension, and even illness. The body keeps score of what the mind chooses to ignore. Suppressed emotions are linked to a variety of physical ailments, from headaches and digestive problems to chronic pain and cardiovascular issues. The emotional weight we carry affects not just our mental health but our physical well-being as well. What begins as a means of self-protection, a way to keep from feeling too much, turns into an invisible prison. The more we suppress, the more we become disconnected from our true selves, from our feelings, and from our authenticity. The silent trap of emotional suppression keeps us locked in a cycle of denial, leaving us unable to heal, unable to grow, and unable to experience the full range of life's emotional spectrum. It is not until we confront and express our emotions that we can truly release their hold over us and move forward in a healthy, balanced way. The dangers of living a false narrative. We all have stories we tell ourselves. These stories shape the way we perceive our lives, our circumstances, and even our identities. Some of these narratives are based on truth, shaped by our experiences and the world around us. But there is a particular kind of story, one that is not rooted in reality, that can silently take hold of our lives, the false narrative. A false narrative is a story we tell ourselves that isn't aligned with who we truly are or the reality of our situation. It's a story that we construct to cope with fear, shame, or disappointment, and over time, it becomes the lens through which we see ourselves and the world. Living within a false narrative feels like wearing a mask. We convince ourselves that everything is fine, that we are someone we are not, or that we are living a life that we wish were true. Perhaps it's the belief that we have to appear perfect to others, or the lie that we can handle everything on our own. Maybe it's the idea that we are in control of every situation, or that we have no weaknesses. Whatever form it takes, the false narrative becomes a shield that protects us from facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves or our lives. The problem, however, is that living in this constructed reality is not sustainable. It's only a matter of time before the weight of the lie becomes too heavy to bear. The danger of a false narrative is that it distorts our perception of reality. We begin to view the world through a lens that is not objective, but rather colored by the stories we've told ourselves. For example, we might convince ourselves that we don't need help, that asking for assistance is a sign of weakness. In doing so, we isolate ourselves, believing the false narrative that we must handle everything alone. We push others away, hide our struggles, and end up feeling more isolated and disconnected. The false narrative tells us that our worth is tied to our ability to be self-sufficient and invulnerable, but this only breeds a deep sense of inadequacy when we inevitably struggle or fail to meet these impossible standards. Another danger of living a false narrative is the toll it takes on our emotional health. When we live in a way that is incongruent with who we truly are, we feel disconnected from ourselves. We suppress our true desires, needs, and emotions, creating an internal conflict that leads to stress, anxiety, and confusion. We start to question who we really are because we are no longer in alignment with our authentic selves. We become trapped in a cycle of pretending, and the longer we live in the false narrative, the more difficult it becomes to see the truth. This emotional dissonance can lead to a sense of emptiness, a feeling that something is missing but not knowing what it is. Furthermore, living a false narrative can destroy relationships. People around us can often sense when we are not being real. We may try to maintain an image of perfection or self-sufficiency, but this creates a barrier between us and others. We may fear that if we reveal our true selves, our vulnerabilities, our struggles, our imperfections, others will not accept us. So we continue to perpetuate the lie, wearing the mask of the person we think we should be, instead of embracing the truth of who we are. Over time, this disconnection builds walls between us and those we care about, and we find ourselves more isolated even when we are surrounded by people. The false narrative also prevents us from growing. If we are living in a story that isn't true, we are not allowing ourselves to confront our real challenges, face our limitations, or acknowledge our weaknesses. Growth requires self-awareness and the courage to face the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. But when we live within a false narrative, we are denying ourselves the opportunity to confront and learn from our mistakes. We stay stuck in the same patterns, avoiding change and growth, because the false story we've constructed shields us from seeing the areas where we need to improve or evolve. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of a false narrative is that it becomes ingrained in us over time. What begins as a protective coping mechanism, a way to manage our fears or insecurities, becomes a part of our identity. We forget that it is just a story, not the truth. We become so attached to the narrative that we lose sight of who we really are beneath it. We start to believe that the lie is our truth, and in doing so, we lose the chance to live authentically. We become prisoners of our own creation. Living in a false narrative not only disconnects us from our true selves, but it also disconnects us from the life we are meant to live. The more we hold onto these false stories, the more we deny ourselves the freedom that comes from embracing our real truth, our flaws, our struggles, and our humanity. Only by confronting the false narratives we tell ourselves can we begin to rewrite a more authentic story, one that is rooted in the truth of who we are, not who we think we should be. Acknowledging the truth is the first step toward real transformation. It is in the face of the truth that change begins to take shape, where growth becomes possible. For many of us, the truth can be uncomfortable, even painful. It forces us to confront aspects of ourselves, our past, or our circumstances that we would rather avoid. But only by embracing this truth can we break free from the chains of denial and false narratives that bind us. Transformation is not a matter of wishing things were different or pretending everything is okay. It requires us to first recognize and accept reality as it is, no matter how difficult it may be. The truth, in its rawest form, holds the power to liberate us. Denial and avoidance may offer temporary relief, but they never lead to lasting change. We often convince ourselves that if we ignore the reality of our situation, it will somehow disappear. Whether it's unresolved emotions, unacknowledged pain, or difficult truths about ourselves, pushing them down only postpones the inevitable. The longer we resist the truth, the more it festers and accumulates, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Transformation, however, only begins when we stop running from the truth and begin to embrace it, no matter how daunting it seems. One of the most profound aspects of acknowledging the truth is the power it has to break the cycle of self-deception. We are often our own worst enemies, constructing elaborate stories to justify our actions, to rationalize our mistakes, or to avoid facing uncomfortable realities. It's easier to lie to ourselves than to admit that we've made poor choices or that we're stuck in unhealthy patterns. But when we confront the truth about our behaviors, our limitations, and our past decisions, we open the door to change. Only when we stop deceiving ourselves can we begin to see things clearly and take responsibility for our lives. This is where real empowerment starts, not in blaming others or external circumstances, but in owning the reality of our situation. Transformation also involves accepting the truth about who we are at our core. This means acknowledging both our strengths and our weaknesses, our successes and our failures. Too often, we shy away from the parts of ourselves we deem unworthy or flawed. We may be afraid that facing our imperfections will diminish our sense of self-worth, or we may feel ashamed of our mistakes. But true transformation cannot occur if we are constantly hiding from our authentic selves. When we accept the totality of who we are, our humanity, our vulnerability, and our flaws, we begin to heal. The truth, in this sense, becomes a mirror that reflects our real selves, not the idealized version we wish to project. In seeing ourselves as we truly are, we gain the clarity necessary to make conscious changes and to grow into the person we are meant to be. Another key element of transformation through acknowledging the truth is the release of fear. Fear thrives in secrecy, in darkness, and in denial. When we refuse to face the truth, we are often motivated by fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. But when we bring the truth into the light, we neutralize its power over us. Acknowledging the truth can be liberating because it diminishes the power of fear. The more we confront difficult truths, the less control they have over our lives. We stop being paralyzed by what we don't understand, and we begin to act from a place of courage and authenticity. This courage is the catalyst for transformation, enabling us to move forward despite the challenges or discomforts we may face. Transformation also requires a shift in perspective. Acknowledging the truth does not mean we accept our circumstances as permanent or unchangeable. Instead, it means we embrace the possibility of growth and improvement. The truth is not the end of the road, but the starting point. When we acknowledge where we are, whether in our relationships, our career, or our personal lives, we are not condemning ourselves. We are simply seeing the reality of our present situation. From there, we can begin to map out a path to where we want to be. The truth gives us the information we need to make informed decisions, to set realistic goals, and to take the necessary steps toward change. Without this foundation, we are simply guessing, making choices based on assumptions or wishful thinking, rather than on the reality of what needs to happen. Ultimately, transformation through acknowledging the truth is about reclaiming our power. It is about breaking free from the constraints of illusion, false narratives, and denial. It's about stepping into the fullness of who we are and what we are capable of becoming. This process is not instantaneous, nor is it always easy, but it is the only way to create lasting, meaningful change. The truth is not something to be feared or avoided. It is a powerful force that, when embraced, can propel us toward a new beginning, a new chapter, and a deeper, more authentic life.